Welcome to Twilight Fables, where fairy tales take on a darker shade, twisted into nightmarish forms you've never heard before. Tonight, we begin the tale of the Juniper Tree, the family root where a boy's fate is bound not just to cruelty, but to an ancient curse rooted in his own bloodline. The house stood at the very edge of the village, where cobblestone broke down into dirt and the roads thinned into footpaths that wound toward the moors. It was a respectable enough dwelling, 2 stories high, whitewashed walls, a roof tiled in deep red clay, but there was something in its stillness that unsettled the eye. No chickens pecked in its yard. No laundry flapped on lines strung between posts. The shutters were almost always closed, and when they did open, they seemed to gape like tired eyes. But most of all, people remembered the tree. The juniper tree grew in the garden behind the house, taller than the roof, older than the house itself. Its trunk was thick, furrowed, twisted, as though it had grown not with the sky's blessing, but in defiance of it. The branches seemed to knot around one another like clenched fists, heavy with dark needles that never shed, even when winter stripped every other tree bare. Its berries came in clusters the colour of old blood, red and black and gleaming, and no bird ever landed there to eat them. It was a relic. That was the word people used. It had been there since before the town was founded, before even the first chapel was raised from stone. Some swore it had once marked a burial site. Others whispered it had been planted by hands not human, and that its roots ran deeper than the village itself. Children feared it. Some dared each other to pluck a berry from its branches, and those who did often woke sick and delirious, muttering strange words as if in fever. Animals refused to graze too near its shade. Travellers paused to look at it and always turned their eyes away quickly, as though they had glimpsed something indecent. The house and the tree together formed a pair, and over the years the villagers grew accustomed to speaking of them as if they were one and the same. The house under the juniper, they called it, the cursed house. Inside lived a man, his wife, and their young son. The wife was a pale woman, fragile in her beauty, the sort of beauty that made people think of candles, lovely but short-lived, destined to melt away. Her cheeks never kept their colour through the winters, and her breath was often shallow, with a faint rattle beneath. Yet she had a warmth in her eyes when she looked at her son, a warmth that seemed to fight the shadow of the house. The boy was her heart. He was small for his age, with hair pale as straw and grey eyes too deep for childhood. He was quiet, preferring to sit alone, most often at the roots of the juniper tree. There he would rest his hand on the trunk, pressing his palm flat against the bark, as though listening. The wife never liked it, though she said little. When she looked at him in those moments, she thought he seemed less like a child and more like something the tree itself had sprouted, a figure moulded from root and shadow. She told herself she was only being fanciful, but the villagers had long memories, and she had heard the stories too. Her husband's family had lived in that house for generations, and each generation had borne the same wound. The firstborn son of the house never grew to manhood. They wasted away, or fell ill, or were taken by accidents. So cruel, they seemed designed. A boy drowning in a shallow pond, another slipping from the roof, one simply found stiff in his bed, no mark upon him. Always it was the firstborn son. Always, and always after the death, the family buried him beneath the juniper tree. The wife had asked her husband once, quietly, whether it had to be so. Why there, beneath that looming shadow? He had looked at her strangely, as though she had asked him whether water must be wet. It has always been so, he said. It is what is done. She never pressed him further, though unease lingered like a stone in her stomach. She wondered if the roots of the tree fed not just on water and soil, but on the flesh of sons. Her own son seemed healthy, stronger than the ones she had heard spoken of in hushed voices, but in the quiet of night, when his small chest rose and fell beside her in his cradle, she sometimes held her breath, waiting for his to stop, waiting for the curse. The years passed, and her fear deepened. In her final winter, when her lungs failed her and she lay upon her deathbed, with the snow drifting thick outside, she clutched her husband's wrist with surprising strength. "When I am gone," she whispered, her lips pale and dry, "bury me beneath the juniper tree. Let me watch over him. It is where I belong." Her husband hesitated, for her words unsettled him, but she would not let go until he agreed. And when the time came, he did as she asked. The villagers watched from a distance as he dug the grave. None came near to offer help. They said the ground was sour, that it smelled of iron and rot. They said the roots writhed when struck with a spade. The boy stood close to the tree, silent. He did not weep as the coffin was lowered into the earth. He only pressed his hand against the bark, as though listening, his grey eyes fixed on the branches overhead. The air was still, yet the needles whispered, as if stirred by a wind only he could feel. When the grave was filled, the boy at last spoke, his voice thin. "She's not gone," he said. The husband turned, startled. "What did you say?" The boy only pressed his hand harder to the bark. Life continued, though differently. The man remarried within the year, urged on by neighbours who said a boy needed a mother, and by his own loneliness. His new wife was younger, strong, broad-hipped, with laughter that rang through the house. She bore a daughter, rosy-cheeked and loud, but she did not love the boy. To her, he was not merely a stepson, but a shadow, a reminder of the first wife who had been beautiful in her frailty and whose memory lingered like perfume. The boy was too quiet, too strange, too fixed upon the juniper tree. She tried at first to ignore him, but when she looked out the window and saw him standing in the yard, his hand pressed to the bark, his lips moving in whispers, something inside her twisted. Then came the nights, the scratching on the shutters, the sound of branches tapping, though the air was still. She lay awake beside her husband and listened. At first she thought it no more than the tree shifting in the dark, but then she began to hear words, soft, faint, but words. Feed me. The first time she sat bolt upright, her skin crawling. Her husband muttered in his sleep, but she lay awake until dawn, heart hammering, certain she had only imagined it. The next night it came again. Feed me. And the night after that. By the end of a week, she could not bear to sleep. By the end of a month, the voice followed her, even into waking, a murmur beneath her thoughts. Feed me. She watched the boy. He grew stranger by the day. His eyes clouded and far away. Sometimes she caught his lips moving, as though repeating something no one else could hear. When she shouted his name, he blinked at her, startled, and for a moment she thought she saw another expression on his face. Not confusion, not fear, but a kind of knowing. She began to dream. She dreamed of roots breaking through the floorboards, coiling around her daughter's crib, tightening until the baby's cries strangled into silence. She dreamed of needles pressing against her skin, piercing her, draining her dry. She dreamed of the boy, standing at the foot of her bed, grey eyes wide, whispering in time with the creak of branches outside. Each morning she woke with her sheets damp with sweat, her mouth dry as ash, and still the voice lingered. The juniper tree was hungry. It had always been hungry, and soon she began to understand. It would not be denied. The stepmother's sleep unravelled. By day, she moved through the house with stiff hands and hollow eyes, snapping at her husband, at the servants, at her own daughter, when the child's cries became too shrill. But her fury always circled back to the boy. He was too quiet, too knowing. His presence filled every corner like a draught, something you could feel but never see. She hated the way he sat beneath the juniper tree for hours, hand pressed to the bark, face turned toward the branches, as though the tree were a priest, and he its devout. Sometimes she watched from the window. She could swear the tree leaned toward him, its branches sagging just slightly lower when he came near, and when his lips moved, though she could never catch the words, she was certain he was speaking to it, or worse, answering it. The voice in her head agreed. Feed me. At first, it was only at night, but soon it followed her into day. While she washed vegetables, the scrape of knife against board was drowned beneath its whisper. While she hung laundry, the creak of rope became its chant. Even in her husband's presence, even as he smiled faintly, weary from his own grief, the words slithered beneath his voice, hissing at her. Feed me, Feed me. She tried to ignore it. She prayed. She pressed her hands over her ears until her head throbbed. But the more she resisted, the sharper it became, until she thought her skull might split. And always the boy was there. One morning, she found him in the kitchen before dawn, standing on a stool, cutting bread with a knife longer than his arm. He turned at her entrance, grey eyes flat. "I was hungry," he said simply. She snatched the knife from his hand, her fingers trembling. "You'll hurt yourself." He only blinked, then slid from the stool and padded silently out of the room, leaving her staring after him, the blade still warm from his touch. She tried to tell her husband. She whispered that the boy was strange, that he frightened her, that he was not like other children. Her husband grew angry. "You will not speak of him so," he said. "He is my son. He has lost enough." But she saw it in him too, the way his eyes flickered when the boy pressed his palm to the bark, the way his jaw tightened when the tree whispered in the wind. He heard it too, she thought. He just would not admit it. The girl, her daughter, was the only bright thing. The child laughed, reaching out for her mother's hair, tugging at her apron. The stepmother clutched her, breathing in her warmth, as if to remind herself she still belonged to the living. But even then, when she held her baby, the voice came, low and insistent. "Not her. Him. Feed me." She began to dread the evenings, when her husband went out to tend the animals, and the house grew still. The boy always vanished to the tree at dusk, sitting cross-legged at its roots. Sometimes, when she could not resist, she crept closer, holding her breath. Once she heard him. He was whispering. The words were too soft to understand, but his voice rose and fell in rhythm, like a prayer, like a lullaby. The branches above him swayed, though there was no wind. She fled before he could see her. That night, she dreamed again. In the dream, she stood at the kitchen table. The boy sat upon it, smiling faintly, his grey eyes pale as ash. His chest was open, ribs spread like the husks of a cracked seed, and inside there was not flesh, but roots, roots slick and black, writhing, winding down his legs and arms. "Feed me," he said, though his lips did not move. The roots spilled from him like water, lashing out, curling around her throat, pulling her toward the open cage of his chest. She struggled, screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the rustle of needles, by the whisper of the juniper's leaves. She woke with a cry, her daughter stirring in her crib beside the bed. The boy was standing in the doorway watching. He said nothing. He only turned and slipped away, silent as a shadow. The days grew longer. Her dread festered. She began to imagine ways of ending it, of silencing the voice. She thought of sending the boy away. But where could he go? No one in the village would take him. She thought of begging her husband to send him to distant kin, but she knew the man would never agree. The whispers grew louder. "Feed me." The voice no longer sounded like a stranger. It was closer now, crawling beneath her skin, twining through her veins. Sometimes, when her daughter nursed, she heard the whisper through her child's soft gulps, as if the tree drank from her too. She began to believe there was only one way to stop it, only one offering the tree would accept: the boy. One afternoon, she found him in the yard, kneeling at the base of the tree, his face tipped toward the sky. She approached slowly, clutching her apron in her fists. "What do you hear when you sit there?" she asked. He turned his head, surprised. For a moment, she thought he would not answer. Then he said simply, "Her." Her stomach tightened. "Who?" "My mother." He placed his hand against the bark again, as though to prove it. His grey eyes softened. "She talks to me. She says she's still here." The stepmother's mouth went dry. For an instant, she almost pitied him. Almost. But then the voice slid through her, hot and sharp. "Feed me." Her vision blurred. She swayed, gripping the bark herself. It pulsed beneath her hand, alive, throbbing like the beat of a buried heart. The boy tilted his head, watching her. "You hear it too," he said quietly. Her throat closed, and then he smiled. It was not the smile of a child. The stepmother began to count the days, not by sun or season, but by how loud the voice grew inside her. It had settled into her bones now, a constant presence, like marrow turned to whisper. At times, she almost thought she could bear it, if only it stayed faint, like a murmur behind the wall. But it grew bolder each morning, insistent each night, until she felt her skull would crack beneath its persistence. "Feed me." Her hands shook when she kneaded bread. She spilled water from the pail. She forgot her daughter's feeding times, until the child wailed, red-faced in hunger. Her husband noticed her unease, but he mistook it for weariness. He praised her strength, her patience, her care of both children. His words made her want to scream, for she could not say aloud the truth. The boy was no longer a child. Oh, his body was still small, his limbs thin, but there was something in his eyes that no child ought to bear. She saw it when he looked at her, an oldness, unknowing. She saw it when he sat beneath the juniper, lips moving in rhythm with the sway of the branches. She saw it most of all when he smiled, that faint curve of lips that was not joy but triumph, as though he knew something she did not. She thought of her dreams, of roots spilling from his chest, of branches splitting the roof. She began to believe they were not dreams, but glimpses of truth, of what the house under the juniper truly was. And still the voice pressed on. "Feed me." It happened one grey morning, when the sky hung low and the clouds threatened rain. The boy followed her into the kitchen, silent as always, standing in the doorway like a shadow. She turned, startled. Her hand slipped. and the knife she held clattered against the board, slicing her finger. A bead of blood welled bright against her pale skin. The boy's eyes dropped to it. For a moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped closer. "You shouldn't waste it," he said softly. Her breath caught. "Waste it," she echoed. He lifted his hand, pointed toward the window where the juniper tree loomed, its branches trembling though the air was still. "It's hungry." Her knees nearly gave way. She clutched the table, staring at him, but he only turned and walked calmly from the room, leaving her to press a rag against her bleeding finger, her heart thundering in her chest. That night, she could not sleep. Every creak of the house became a whisper, every sigh of the wind a command. "Feed me." She rose before dawn, her body trembling. She went to the chest by the hearth and lifted the lid. The knife lay there, clean, the faintest gleam catching firelight. Her hand hovered over it. She thought of her daughter, asleep upstairs. She thought of her husband, weary and blind. She thought of the boy's grey eyes, too old, too knowing. She thought of silence, a silence without whispers. Her fingers closed on the hilt. She lured the boy into the kitchen with promises of an apple. He followed without question, his face as calm as ever. She placed the apple in a bowl, her hands steady now, her voice soft. "Here, for you." He climbed onto the stool, reached for it. Her hand tightened on the knife. For one heartbeat, she hesitated. She saw him as he had been once, a smaller child, pale hair, soft in the sun, his mother's hand resting gently on his shoulder. She almost dropped the blade, but then the voice surged through her, stronger than ever, filling her skull until she thought it would split her head apart. "Feed me." Her arm swung down. The boy gasped, the apple tumbling from his fingers. His grey eyes widened, then softened, almost peaceful. He did not scream. The knife struck true. Blood spilled, bright as the berries on the tree outside. For a moment, there was only silence, sweet, blessed silence. Then the house groaned. The branches of the juniper scraped the shutters, hard enough to rattle them in their frames. The roots beneath the floor seemed to shift, the ground itself heaving like a sleeping beast disturbed. And in that silence, broken only by the rustle of needles, the stepmother heard the voice again, not faint, not insistent, triumphant. Yes, she worked quickly, frantically. She wrapped the boy's body in cloth, cradled it against her chest, and staggered out to the garden. The soil at the base of the juniper was already loose, as if waiting. She dug with her bare hands, fingernails splitting, skin tearing, until the earth gave way. She laid him there, beneath the gnarled roots, and covered him with soil. Her breath came ragged, her hands were raw, her dress spattered, but the voice inside her had gone quiet. The tree swayed, its branches shivering. The berries gleamed, heavy and red. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. She turned back toward the house, toward her daughter's cries. Upstairs, her husband would never know. No one would ever know. The boy was gone. The curse had been fed, and the juniper tree, satisfied at last, stood silent. Or so she thought. The breaking of the porcelain bowl lingered in the house like a wound that would not close. It had been an ordinary accident. China slipped, shattered, but in this house, with the weight of the juniper tree pressing its shadow across every window, nothing remained ordinary. The boy's laughter at the sound, too pure and unbothered, unsettled the stepmother more than the sharp fragments scattered across the floor. He had not even flinched when the shards grazed his skin, leaving a bright bead of blood on his finger. He had looked at the crimson dot with fascination, then wiped it on his trousers as if it were nothing. The stepmother, however, could not stop staring at the blood. It bloomed in her mind like the berries outside, round, red, waiting. That night she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy beneath the juniper, the blood on his hand, the light in his eyes too bright for any child. She lay awake, rigid, while her husband snored beside her, dreaming the heavy dreams of a man blind to the rot in his own home. The whispers did not stop when she left her bed. They grew clearer. He belongs to us. The stepmother stood by the window, her nightdress pale in the moonlight, her hair tangled with sweat. The tree outside did not move, yet she could feel it watching her. Its branches curved like arched arms, heavy with dark berries, each one gleaming with reflected moonlight. She thought of plucking one, of tasting its bitterness, but her hand faltered on the sill. When she turned, she found the boy in the doorway. He said nothing. He only stood there, silent, as though he had been listening all along. She froze, caught between shame and fear. "What are you doing out of bed?" she whispered harshly. The boy tilted his head. "The tree said you'd be here." Her blood ran cold. She wanted to deny it, wanted to scold him, but the words caught in her throat. He padded back to his room, leaving her with the silence, which was far worse than the whispers. The days that followed twisted further. The stepmother began to hear stories in the marketplace, not the usual gossip about crops or trade, but murmurs about the house under the juniper tree. They say the boy walks at night. His mother's blood is still in the ground, and it feeds him. The tree roots run through their cellar. They say you can hear them knocking. None of the townsfolk spoke these things openly. It was always whispered, exchanged in corners, accompanied by nervous glances toward the house's direction. The stepmother heard it all, for her ears strained for anything that might explain the dread growing inside her. At home, the boy grew stranger still. He no longer laughed in ways a child should. His voice sometimes rang too clearly, echoing as though carried by hollow wood. At times, she caught him humming low, throaty sounds that made the hairs on her arms rise. When she asked what song it was, he answered simply, "The tree taught me." Her husband noticed nothing. He sat at table with his son and smiled at his cleverness, his appetite, his gentle manners. The stepmother wanted to scream at him, "Can you not see? Do you not hear?" But the words would not form. She feared if she spoke, the tree itself would silence her. That autumn, the juniper bore fruit in abundance. More berries than anyone could remember hung heavy from its branches, black-red and glistening like wet eyes. The ground beneath was littered with those that fell, staining the earth. The boy gathered them eagerly, filling bowls and baskets, carrying them into the house. "Don't bring those in here," the stepmother snapped once, her voice sharp with panic. "They're mine," the boy said simply. "They belong to me." She slapped the bowl from his hands. The berries scattered across the floor, rolling into corners, under tables, into shadows. The boy did not cry. He only looked at her with calm, unblinking eyes that made her skin crawl. That night, she dreamed of berries sprouting from her tongue, choking her, their juices flooding her throat until she drowned. The father began to spend more time away, overseeing the fields, meeting with neighbours, bartering for supplies. He did not see the way the stepmother's hands trembled when she poured water, nor the way the boy lingered too long beneath the tree, whispering to it as if to a companion. One evening, when the father was away and the house was hushed except for the wind, the stepmother heard the boy's voice drifting from the garden. She crept to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Yes," he whispered, "I know. She doesn't understand. She doesn't hear you like I do." A pause, then a laugh, too deep for a child's throat. "I can be yours." "I already am," the stepmother nearly cried out, but something inside her held her still. She listened as his voice continued, murmuring things she could not fully catch, syllables that seemed older than language. Her stomach knotted with terror. When she finally pushed the door open, the boy was kneeling at the tree's roots, hands buried in the soil. He looked up at her calmly. "The roots are warm," he said. She slammed the door shut and locked it, though what use was a lock against roots that ran beneath the house? That night, her dreams grew worse. She dreamed she was lying in the earth, buried beneath the juniper, the soil pressed against her lungs, filling her mouth, her nose, her ears. Above her, the boy's laughter rang hollow, bird-like, and the tree's branches scratched across the sky, blotting out the stars. She tried to scream, but only berries poured from her throat, rolling over her lips, filling the grave until she drowned in them. When she awoke, the sheets were damp with sweat, and her pillow smelled faintly of crushed fruit. She stumbled from the bed and found berry skins in her hands, though she could not remember holding them. The father returned the next morning, cheerful and tired, bringing with him bread and cured meat. He kissed his wife's cheek, hugged his son, and spoke of trade. He did not notice the way his wife's eyes darted to the window, to the tree outside, or the way the boy's gaze lingered too long on the berries that clung to the branches like offerings. At dinner, the father spoke of inviting neighbours to visit, to share a meal. The stepmother nearly dropped her knife. The idea of others entering the house filled her with dread. What if they saw? What if they heard the whispers too? What if the tree demanded of them as it demanded of her? But she said nothing. She sat in silence while her husband made plans, her hands clenching until her nails left crescents in her palms. The next day, the neighbours came, 2 families bringing their children, laughing, carrying baskets of apples. They sat at the table, breaking bread, speaking of harvests and weather. The boy sat among them, smiling politely. For a moment, the stepmother almost believed things might be ordinary again. Then she noticed the children staring at the boy. They leaned close to him, listening intently as he whispered something. Their faces paled, their mouths opened slightly, and then they began to giggle. Soft, strange giggles that did not sound like children at play. The stepmother rose abruptly, nearly upsetting her chair. "Eat your food," she said harshly. The children obeyed, but their eyes flicked back to the boy again and again, as though caught by an invisible string. That night, after the neighbours had gone, she found a cluster of berries hidden beneath the table, crushed into the wood. Their juice stained the floor, dark and sticky like blood. The stepmother began to mark the days. She carved small notches into the frame of her mirror, one for each night she endured, but the marks grew crooked, the knife slipping as her hand shook. She lost count, and the days blurred. The boy grew taller, faster than he should. His limbs lengthened, his eyes deepened, his voice grew steadier. Sometimes, when he spoke, she heard not one voice, but 2, the boy's and another beneath it, like the groan of roots shifting underground. She told herself she must act, but how? To cut down the tree was unthinkable. Even the villagers would not dare. To harm the boy was worse, for though he frightened her, some part of her recoiled at the thought of laying hand against him. He was a child still, or had been once, and yet, each night, the whispers pressed harder. He belongs to us. He always has. Every son must return. You cannot fight what is planted. One evening, as dusk fell, the boy stood beneath the tree, arms outstretched. The stepmother watched from the window, heart pounding. A wind rose, stirring the branches, though the air beyond remained still. The berries swayed, and one by one they began to drop, dozens of them, falling at his feet. rolling against his shoes. He looked up at the house and smiled. The stepmother stepped back from the window, clutching the wall to steady herself. She knew then that something was coming, something she could not prevent. The tree had chosen, as it always did. But this time, she thought, perhaps the choice was not complete. Perhaps the boy might resist, even if she could not. Perhaps there was still a chance to break the root that had wound through their blood for generations. Or perhaps it was already too late. The season turned colder, though the juniper tree did not shed as the other trees did. Its needles remained dark and fragrant. Its berries hung heavy, even as frost clung to the fields. The villagers said it was unnatural, that no tree should feed so richly when all others starved. Some whispered that the tree drank from the veins beneath it, not the soil. In the house, the stepmother counted the days by the sound of berries falling against the roof. At night, she would wake to the soft plink, 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 as though the tree were feeding the house directly. Sometimes she swore she heard them rolling down the tiles, finding cracks in the thatch, slipping into the rooms. She would rise in panic and search, only to find none, and yet the scent of them lingered, sharp and sweet, like iron and rot. The boy thrived. His cheeks were ruddy, his eyes clear, his limbs strong. He grew faster than seemed possible, his bones stretching to fill him out, his voice already deepening, though he was still young. He spent his days at the tree side, gathering berries, pressing them in his hands until they bled juice. His fingernails were always stained purple. The stepmother tried to scrub them clean once, but he only smiled and said, "It never washes out, not when it belongs to you." The words haunted her. She wondered if her hands too bore stains she could not see. The father remained blind. He worked longer hours in the fields, his back bent, his arms corded with toil. He came home weary but cheerful, pleased by the bounty of their harvest, by his son's health, by the quiet he thought meant peace. The stepmother did not tell him of the voices. What could she say? That the tree spoke to her? That the boy was no longer a boy? He would laugh, she knew, and brush it away as a wife's fretfulness. And so she held her tongue, and the silence ate her. The boy, however, had begun to test her silence. At first, it was small things, a glance too long, a word spoken with double meaning, but soon he began to mock her outright, though never in his father's presence. Once, as she cut bread, he leaned close and whispered, "It's not your house, it's ours. It always has been." She dropped the knife, her fingers trembling. "Go to your room," she hissed, but he only smiled and picked up the blade, holding it lightly between thumb and finger. "Do you know what the roots taste like?" he asked. They taste like mother's blood. She slapped the knife from his hand, but he did not flinch. He only looked at her with those unblinking eyes, and she fled the kitchen, her heart hammering. The neighbours began to keep their distance. Children who once played in the lane avoided the house, crossing to the far side with hurried steps. Their parents did not stop them. When the stepmother went to the market, she felt eyes follow her, but no one greeted her. She carried her basket alone, the weight of isolation pressing as heavily as the goods inside. One woman, braver than most, approached her once. "You must be careful," she said in a low voice. "That tree, it doesn't forgive." The stepmother wanted to seize her, to demand she explain, but the woman hurried away, leaving only fear in her wake. That night, the stepmother dreamed again. She dreamed she was bound to the juniper's trunk, her arms stretched wide, her body swallowed by bark. The boy's face peered out from the branches, his mouth filled with berries. He chewed slowly, juice running down his chin, staining his shirt. When she begged him to stop, he spat the berries into her mouth until she choked. She awoke with the taste of iron on her tongue. The boy's laughter grew sharper, more cruel. He no longer needed to hide it. One afternoon, while his father mended tools, the boy stood in the doorway, humming the strange tune the tree had taught him. The stepmother covered her ears, but the sound seeped through, vibrating in her bones. She stumbled to her knees, gasping, as if the song itself crushed her chest. "Stop!" she cried. The boy did. He tilted his head, watching her with mild curiosity. "You hear it too," he said. "You feel it. It's inside you now. You can't deny it." She wanted to strike him, to shake him, to do anything to wipe that knowing smile from his lips, but her hands would not move. She could not act against him. Something in her blood bound her, as surely as the roots bound the earth. Winter settled in, harsh and unrelenting. Snow piled high against the house, muffling all sound. The juniper, however, stood untouched, its branches bent, but never broke, its berries still full and ripe, even in the dead of frost. Birds gathered in its boughs, dark flocks that did not sing, they only watched, their eyes glinting like beads. The father praised the tree for its bounty. "We are blessed," he said, cupping berries in his calloused palms. "Other families go hungry, but we have this gift." The stepmother bit her tongue until she tasted blood. She wanted to scream at him. "It is no gift. It is a curse." But she feared the boy's reaction more than her husband's ignorance. The boy had begun to sit at the table as though he were master of the house. His voice carried weight beyond his years, his words edged with command. Even his father sometimes obeyed him without realizing it, fetching things at his suggestion. laughing at his comments as though they were the wisdom of an elder. The stepmother watched, horrified, as her husband bent to their son's will, oblivious to the unnatural shift of power. One night, unable to bear it longer, she crept from her bed and went to the tree. The snow crunched under her feet, the cold slicing her lungs with every breath. She placed her hands on the trunk, the bark rough and cold. "What do you want?" she whispered. The tree did not answer with words. Instead, she felt a pulse beneath her palms, steady and slow, like the beating of a heart. She pressed harder, desperate, and the ground shifted. Roots writhed beneath the snow, curling around her boots. She stumbled back, heart racing, and fled to the house. Behind her, the tree stood silent, its branches heavy with berries, yet she knew it had heard her. She knew it had answered. The boy's cruelty sharpened with the turning of the year. He no longer played at being a child. His laughter cut like broken glass. His eyes gleamed with knowledge far too old. He spoke to his father of the family's land, of their lineage, of what must be preserved. His father nodded proudly, hearing only ambition in his son's voice. But the stepmother heard something else, the echo of the tree's whispers. One evening, as snow fell thick against the windows, the boy leaned across the table and said to her, "Do you know why you fear me?" She gripped her cup so tightly it cracked. "Because you are not my son." He smiled. "No, you fear me because you know I am yours too. You carry the root in you as much as I do. You can't escape it. You never could." She fled the room, trembling, her breath clouding in the cold air. That night, she dreamt again. She dreamt of her husband lying beneath the roots, his chest split open, his blood flowing into the soil. The boy knelt beside him, pressing berries into the wound. The roots drank eagerly, twisting tighter, pulsing with life. When she awoke, her husband still breathed beside her, but she knew the dream was not merely a dream. It was a warning, or perhaps a promise. She began to plan, not carefully, not rationally. Her mind was too frayed for that, but some part of her knew she could not let the tree take another. She could not let it claim her husband as it had claimed the boy. She must act, even if it meant breaking herself in the process. And yet, as she thought this, she felt the roots shifting beneath the house, as if they had heard, as if they waited. The stepmother had never been a brave woman, nor had she ever thought of herself as particularly devout. But when the winter deepened and the tree's shadow seemed to reach even through the snowlight, she began to pray. Not the prayers she had learned as a girl, neat and orderly recitations, but broken, desperate words whispered into the night. She prayed in the pantry, behind closed doors, where no one could hear. She prayed over the wash basin, her fingers raw and red from the cold water. She prayed with her face pressed to the floorboards, as though the roots that pressed upward beneath them might show mercy if they heard her submission. No mercy came, only the sound of berries falling, night after night. The boy had changed again. It was not just his body, though he grew taller and stronger at a pace that startled her. It was his manner, the way he walked through the house, as if the walls bent toward him, the way he spoke in a tone that brooked no refusal. His father obeyed him without realizing it. Neighbours avoided him without daring to say why. Only the stepmother saw clearly, or perhaps, she thought bitterly, only she was meant to. The first sign of her breaking came when she dreamed of fire. She saw herself standing at the base of the juniper, torch in hand, her face lit with orange fury. The flames leapt up the trunk, catching quickly, spreading to the branches. For a moment, she felt hope, real and fierce, as the berries split and hissed in the heat. But then came the sound, the groan of roots deep beneath the earth, twisting, wrenching, splitting the ground. She looked down and saw that the roots had coiled around her legs, binding her fast. The fire spread not into the tree, but into her, climbing her body until she burned alive, her screams feeding the tree with smoke. She woke with her throat raw, as though she had screamed aloud. Her husband stirred beside her, murmured something drowsy, and fell back asleep. She sat upright, trembling, knowing that the dream had not been hers alone. It had been shown to her. The boy began to speak of lineage. "We are not like the others," he told his father, his voice low and certain. "We are chosen. The land belongs to us, because the tree belongs to us." His father smiled, proud of his son's words, blind to their meaning. He said, "it has stood for generations, just as our family has." The boy's gaze slid to the stepmother then, and his smile sharpened. "Not all families last, but ours will, forever." She excused herself from the table, clutching her stomach, though it was not sickness that churned inside her, but terror. The stepmother thought of leaving. She imagined taking what little she had, braving the snow, fleeing the house and the tree and the boy who was not a boy. But the thought dissolved whenever she pictured her husband. Could she abandon him? Could she let the tree take him, as it surely would if left unchallenged? Number. She could not, but neither could she face the boy directly. She had tried once, and his laughter had hollowed her out. Confrontation was useless. She needed something else, something older, stronger. She thought of the old stories, the ones whispered by women at market, the ones her own mother had told by firelight, stories of roots that bound, of curses that could not be cut, but could be turned. A tree could not be killed outright, not one that drank from blood instead of water, but perhaps it could be starved, perhaps it could be tricked. The thought gave her a sliver of resolve. Her chance came with the thaw. The snow began to melt, revealing the black earth beneath. The juniper's berries remained plump, but now They dripped with juice, thick and dark, as though the cold had ripened them past nature. The boy gathered them by the handful, eating until his lips were stained, and his breath smelled sweet and sharp. The stepmother watched him, her mind turning. If the tree fed on him, perhaps it could be made to feed on something else. Perhaps its hunger could be misled. That night, she slipped from the house with a knife. She went to the chicken coop, where the birds clucked softly in their sleep. Her hands shook, but she chose one, drew the blade, and let its blood run into a bowl. She carried it to the tree, her breath misting in the cold, her heart pounding. She poured the blood at the base of the trunk. The earth drank quickly, too quickly, as though parched. The roots shifted beneath the soil, and she thought she heard a sigh, deep and content. For the first time in months, she felt hope. The next morning, the boy seemed weakened, only slightly, but she noticed his step was heavier, his voice less sharp. He ate berries greedily, as if trying to replenish what had been taken. The stepmother watched in silence, her heart racing. It had worked. She killed another chicken the next night, and another the night after. Each time she poured the blood at the tree's base, whispering nothing, only listening to the soil drink. Each time the boy grew weaker. His cheeks paled, his eyes dulled, his laughter lost its edge. The stepmother dared to believe she had found the key. She dared to believe she might starve the tree. But then, one night, as she poured the blood, she heard a voice, not the whispers she had known, but a voice clear and sharp, spoken the boy's tone, and the trees at once. This is not enough. She dropped the bowl, blood spilling across her shoes. It will have to be, she whispered. The ground shuddered, roots cracked the earth, writhing, reaching. Not enough, the voice repeated. You know what we want. She fled, stumbling through the mud, clutching her skirts, her lungs burning. She locked the door behind her and sank to the floor, trembling. In her mind, she heard the boy's laughter again, though he was asleep in his bed. The next day, the boy was stronger. His cheeks flushed, his eyes gleamed, his voice rang sharp again. He sat at the table and ate bread as though nothing had changed. The stepmother felt despair press heavy on her chest. The chickens had been enough for a moment, but the tree demanded more. It demanded blood of its own kind. That night, she could not sleep. She sat by the hearth, staring into the embers, listening to the faint creak of roots beneath the floor. She thought of her husband, sleeping peacefully upstairs. She thought of the boy, his breath steady, his dreams, no doubt, filled with whispers. And she thought of herself, caught between them, the only one who saw. She realized then that the tree would not be denied. It had taken for generations, and it would take again. The only choice she had was whom it would take. Her hands clenched into fists. She would not let it claim her husband. She would not let it consume him, as it had the boy. If the tree demanded sacrifice, then perhaps she would choose who gave it, even if that meant blood on her own hands. The stepmother had made her choice. She could no longer linger in the shadows of fear. The tree demanded its due. The boy thrived on its whispers, and her husband remained dangerously ignorant of the true hunger that rooted itself beneath their house. If she did nothing, she knew the tree would claim him, and in claiming him, it would solidify its hold on the boy forever. That night, she moved quietly through the house. The boy slept in his bed, curled beneath a quilt, his hands tucked beneath his chin, a faint smile on his lips. She watched him, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and sorrow. This child had once been innocent, and a part of her still grieved for the boy he might have been. But that part was small, a flickering candle in a storm. The larger part, the part driven by necessity, told her that she could not hesitate. She left the room and descended the stairs. The house was silent, except for the occasional groan of the timbers, shifting in the cold night air. She carried with her a small iron knife and a bowl, her hands trembling as she filled it with water from the kitchen pail. Outside, the juniper tree loomed, its branches heavy with dark berries. The snow had melted enough to reveal patches of black earth, glistening like wet ink beneath the moonlight. She approached the base of the tree, kneeling in the mud. The roots were gnarled and thick, pressing upward from the ground, as if feeling for her. She poured the water across the soil and whispered to the earth, "I am not afraid, I am not afraid." The wind stirred, the branches above rattled like dry bones. She could hear the faintest echo of laughter, carried not from the boy, but from the tree itself. Not enough. Her breath caught. She pressed the knife into her palm to steady herself. She had only one chance. The boy awoke with a start. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. He rose silently from his bed and moved to the window. Outside, he saw her kneeling in the dirt, the knife glinting faintly in the moonlight. He smiled. "You've decided," he said, though she could not hear his words. She felt them in her chest, heavy as iron. "You cannot stop it. You cannot stop me." She pressed the knife into the earth, then struck it again and again, cutting at the roots that coiled just beneath the surface. Each strike made the ground shudder, and she felt the pulse of the tree recoil beneath her hands. She was soaked in mud, her palms bleeding, but she could not stop. Not yet. From the house came a creak. She looked up and saw her husband at the doorway, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What are you doing?" he called. Her hands trembled, but she could not meet his gaze. I have to," she whispered. "It must be stopped." The boy stepped from the shadows of the window. His body was taller now, his limbs too long, his presence unnatural. He moved with a calm certainty, gliding across the snow. "You cannot stop it," he said, his voice deep and echoing, "because it is part of you, as it is part of me." She struck at the roots again. The knife sank deep into the soil, and for a moment a shriek rose from beneath the earth. The tree trembled, its branches twisting violently, scattering snow and broken berries into the night. The boy watched, unmoved, his eyes glinting like shards of ice. The father stepped forward. "Stop!" he shouted. "You will kill us all." But the stepmother did not listen. Her mind had sharpened to a single purpose. She struck again, slicing through a thick root that had pushed against the surface like a living snake. The ground heaved, and the tree let out a groan so low it rattled the very bones of the house. The boy's face twisted, not in fear, but in awe, his lips curling into a smile that was older than time. "Yes," the tree seemed to whisper through him. "Yes, we are bound." She pressed the knife deeper, striking at the roots that seemed to breathe beneath her. The snow around her feet was darkened with the juice of berries and the wet earth, her hands slick with mud and blood. The wind rose, whipping her hair around her face, carrying the sound of laughter and the faint cries of roots splitting and tearing. The boy reached for her, his hand brushing hers, but it did not touch flesh. Instead, the tree seemed to pull him slightly backward, its branches twisting to shield him. "It is stronger than you imagine," he said softly. She struck again. She struck until her arms shook, until the knife nearly fell from her grip, until the wind roared like a living thing, and the earth beneath her quaked. And then, at last, there was silence. The boy's body slumped slightly. His shoulders sagged, though his eyes still glimmered with unnatural light. The tree's branches drooped, and the roots seemed to recoil into the soil, leaving a patch of earth, torn and bleeding. The stepmother sank to her knees, gasping, her palms raw and red. She could hear the faint echo of the tree's pulse still in the ground, but it was weaker now, as though her blows had bought them a reprieve. You're free," she whispered to her husband, who had stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, pale and trembling. The boy's lips curved into a smile, faint but knowing. "Free?" he asked. "Do you think it ends here? The root is inside you, as it is inside me. The tree will not be denied, not ever." Her breath caught. She realized then that though the surface battle had been won, the war was far from over. The boy might be weakened, but the tree was eternal, and its hunger eternal as well. In the days that followed, the house felt different. The oppressive weight of the tree's presence had lessened, though it never vanished entirely. The boy moved more slowly, his steps measured, though his eyes retained a sharpness that unnerved the stepmother. She continued to pray, to whisper to the soil, to watch for signs of the roots stirring beneath the floorboards. Her husband praised her courage, oblivious to the danger still lurking in the soil beneath their home. He believed the worst was behind them. She did not correct him. How could she explain the truth that the boy, the tree, the roots, and herself were all bound together in a pattern older and darker than any human understanding? Some nights she still woke to the sound of berries falling against the roof, the soft plink 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 that reminded her the tree was patient. She knew it would wait, that it would endure, that it would strike again when the time was right, and she knew that the boy would never be ordinary again. The tree had claimed him, and he had claimed the tree. Together, they were something neither wholly human nor wholly natural, something that thrived on fear, on blood, on quiet obedience. She could only watch and wait and hope. The final frost of winter left a sheen of ice over the fields. The juniper tree glimmered black against the dawn, its branches heavy with last season's berries, its roots still thick beneath the soil. The stepmother walked past it each day, feeling the pulse of life just underfoot, the faint tug of something patient and hungry. The boy played outside sometimes, gathering berries with careful hands, humming the song the tree had taught him. His laughter was lighter now, but still carried an undertone that made her shiver. She did not approach him. She did not need to. She could feel the boy's awareness in every glance, every movement, every breath, and always, always, the roots pulsed beneath the earth. The house seemed quieter in the days after the struggle, though the stepmother never truly believed in quiet. She had seen the power of the tree, felt it coil around her family, and she knew it would endure. The boy would endure, and she, caught between them, could do nothing but live under their shadow. Somewhere beneath the soil, the roots waited, patient and eternal. Some day they would rise again, and when they did, the boy would be ready. And so the stepmother learned to live with the sound of berries falling, the whisper of roots shifting beneath the floorboards, and the knowledge that some hunger could never be fully sated. The house at the edge of the field remained, and within it a family divided by blood and soil, bound by the dark heart of the juniper tree. The boy was awake earlier than usual that morning. The first rays of sunlight caught on the black-red berries of the juniper tree, and he stood beneath it, unmoving. His eyes, once bright with childish delight, now gleamed with knowledge that was not meant for mortal minds. He seemed older, though no time had passed fast enough to account for it. "Come," he whispered. The wind carried the words as clearly as if they had been spoken in the room beside her. "It's time." She approached, cautious, her knife hidden beneath her skirt. The tree stretched above them, its branches clawing at the sky. and she could feel the roots trembling beneath the soil, reacting to the boy's presence. "You've been weak," she said softly, addressing the boy and the tree both. "You've grown fat on blood that was not enough." He tilted his head, studying her. "And yet, I am here," he said. "I am whole, and you are afraid, always afraid." She swallowed hard, shaking her head. She could not argue. The truth was undeniable. She was afraid, but she also knew fear could be turned into weapon. She had learned the first lesson too late, but the second would be hers to wield. The house remained silent as they circled the tree. The snow had melted into rivulets of mud that ran along the roots like miniature rivers. The boy bent to gather berries, plucking them one by one and placing them in his mouth with deliberate slowness. She noticed a strange pulse in the ground, subtle but undeniable. The roots had remembered her attempts to weaken them. They had grown accustomed to blood, and now they tested her again, seeking to claim the boy entirely. She knelt beside a root and struck with her knife, slicing through the gnarled wood. The boy's eyes flickered, the first sign of hesitation. The tree groaned in reply, a sound that shook her to the core. Yet she pressed on. "You think you can control me," he said, "but we are one. You are mine as much as the soil is mine. You cannot fight this." "I do not fight alone," she whispered. Her words carried no magic, only intent. She reached into her skirts and drew a small sack filled with dried herbs and soil she had gathered in secret, remnants of rituals long forgotten by the townsfolk. She scattered the mixture along the roots, muttering prayers, fragments of incantations she did not fully understand, but hoped would turn the tree's hunger against itself. The wind rose fierce and sudden, tearing through the branches of the juniper. The boy recoiled, momentarily startled. The roots shuddered, writhing as if in pain. For the first time, she felt the tree hesitate. The battle stretched through the morning, though time seemed suspended beneath the tree's branches. She struck at roots, scattered her herbs, whispered prayers, and all the while the boy watched, his expression inscrutable. The roots rose in retaliation, swiping at her boots, coiling near her ankles, seeking to throw her off balance. She ducked, rolled and struck again. Blood mixed with mud, berries crushed beneath her knees, her fingers raw from the constant friction. And yet, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the tree weakened. The roots that had been so insistent, so patient, began to recoil, curling into the soil as if uncertain. "You cannot win," the boy said. His voice had lost some of its certainty. The light in his eyes flickered. "Perhaps not," she said, "but I can delay you. I can weaken you. I can make you hesitate." The ground trembled. The branches shivered, and for a moment, the house itself seemed to groan in response. hours passed, the stepmother continued her work tirelessly. The boy's posture grew sluggish, his hands less precise as he picked at the berries, trying desperately to maintain his connection to the tree. The roots pulsed weakly, struggling to maintain their hold, but her herbs, prayers, and relentless strikes had taken their toll. Finally, she delivered a decisive blow. A thick root, nearly as wide as her arm, split beneath her knife. The earth shook violently. The branches of the juniper rattled, and the boy fell to his knees, clutching at the base of the tree. For the first time, he cried out, not in laughter, but in pain. The stepmother stood over him, her hands trembling, her knife slick with mud and sap. "It ends now," she said. The boy looked up at her, eyes wide, and for a moment she thought he would cry. Instead, a faint smile returned, fragile but undeniable. "Not yet," he whispered. The roots convulsed one last time, then began to retract fully into the earth. The berries fell in a scattered shower, staining the mud, and the boy slumped, drained, though still alive. The stepmother collapsed beside him, exhausted beyond imagining. The aftermath was quiet. The house seemed smaller, lighter, though the juniper tree remained, stripped of much of its unnatural power. The boy sat in silence for hours, staring at the ground, his body weakened, his mind shaken. She offered him water, which he drank reluctantly. He did not speak. He did not move. Her husband returned later, concerned by the absence of noise, the faint smell of mud and sap. He found the stepmother and the boy together beneath the tree, silent and watchful. She smiled at him weakly, but her eyes remained wary. She could not tell him what had truly transpired. How could she explain the tree's hunger, the boy's unnatural growth, the whispers in the soil? So she said nothing. In the days that followed, the boy slowly recovered. His strength returned, but the faint trembling in his limbs, the occasional flicker in his gaze, reminded her that the battle had left its mark. The tree bore fruit again, though smaller, less vibrant. The roots no longer reached toward the house with the same ferocity, but she knew the pulse of the earth, the subtle tug beneath the floorboards, and she understood the truth. It was not gone. It was only diminished. The stepmother continued her vigilance. She marked the days, tended the herbs, whispered prayers beneath her breath. She could not destroy the tree entirely, nor could she fully unbind the boy from it, but she could watch. She could intervene. She could delay the inevitable. Some nights, she would wake to the faint sound of berries plinking against the roof or the soft murmur of roots moving beneath the floor. She would sit in the dark and listen, knowing that the tree's patience far exceeded human endurance. One day perhaps it would rise again. One day perhaps the boy would rise again fully. But for now, the family endured, bound together by blood, soil, and the dark heart of the juniper tree. The stepmother had won a temporary victory, but she knew the truth of her existence was now inseparable from the tree's pulse and the boy's uncanny presence. And so they lived, cautiously, quietly, under the shadow of roots and branches that waited, ever patient, for the day they would claim the house again. The juniper tree at the edge of the field stood silent, its dark berries glimmering in the sunlight. The wind whispered through its branches, carrying a faint echo of laughter and a reminder. Some hunger can never be fully sated, some roots can never be entirely severed. The boy played outside, careful with the berries, quiet, watchful, and the stepmother followed, wary, determined, enduring, and beneath the soil the roots pulsed, patient, eternal,